Good. We are here with Professor Chris Brewster at UWE and University of West of England, Bristol Business School. So it's a privilege, Chris, to be here. Chris is from Henley, but other places as well. Probably will explain later. Thank you, Chris, very much.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, Chris, as an expert of international management and international human resource management, I have a couple of questions regarding my personal experience and the experience of an academic. So when this passion for international management came to you? When you was a young student?
No. I started off as a practitioner for the first half of my life. And one of the jobs that I had to do for an airline was sending expatriates around the world. I had no idea what I was doing. I said to people, look, it's not something I know anything about. I said, it doesn't matter, you just get on with it. And as I decided to get more involved with the academic thing, I did a doctorate at the London School of Economics. And the people there said, well, you really should put this to some use. So I thought, okay, I'll do 3 years in academics. I chose as a research topic because in those days, people used to give you research funding to attract you to work for them. So I chose as a topic expatriation. And that developed into international human resource management, international business. But that's how it came from a practical experience.
Very good, excellent. Yeah, because I saw that you have, just counting papers, you have more than 190 papers and almost 18 coming in a couple of years, right?
Yeah.
So, and 30 papers in 3 and 4 stars journals and around the globe. So it's the people who read you, we have the feeling that it's not possible to say anything more than Chris.
That's not true. There's a whole range of stuff that we don't know, of course. And, it's always interesting. I mean, I was very lucky that when I started, human resource management was generally seen as having one best way, and that was really the American way. So we learned what the Americans knew, and we tried to copy that, or tried to worry about why we weren't as good as that. And I think I started doing international and comparative human resource management just as the field began to grow. So I was lucky in that respect, and it was relatively easy originally to get articles published on the subject because nobody else was doing it. So that made it easier for me.
Very good, excellent. So what which are the most significant changes in international management in the last maybe 10, 15 years that you will perceive?
Well, I think you've got to distinguish between the practitioners and the academics, because actually the two don't touch as much as they should. I often ask, so I often speak to groups of practitioners, and I ask them who reads the academic journals. Hardly anybody ever puts their hand up. I think developments have been in the academic world have been driven by people's interests and things that we want to understand. I think in the practitioner world, they're driven largely by the economic demands on people and by the consultancies who sell. I used to be a management consultant, so I'm not negative about them, but they sell products and they come up with new ideas and new things, which managers tend to be more influenced by than they do by the academics. Now you can argue that practitioners get influenced by the academics further back, so there's an influence there, but they're different sources of interest. So I think what's happened in the practitioner world is that the field has become more and more diffuse. So there are more and more bigger, giant companies working right around the globe who inevitably are interested in international human resource management. They have no choice. And then there are a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises which perhaps government enterprises, which are not at all interested in it. Very often, of course, now, I mean, in the last few years, we've got small international businesses because the internet has made that possible. So perhaps that's breaking down a little bit, but most of our work, and I think most of the academics' work, is focused on those big multinational corporations. Now, whether that's sensible or correct, because that leaves 95% of the world unexplained.
Yeah.
So, that's another area, and people like yourself with an interest in, say, Latin America, where we know very, very little actually about how people are managed in these kind of countries. And you could say the same for sub-Saharan Africa or for big parts of Asia. Because we're focused on those big multinationals, we tend to focus on the developed countries, because that's where they make their profits. There's much more money to be made out of rich countries than poor countries. And we also tend to focus on the big cities, because that's where they have their operations. So even someone like yourself who knows about Argentina, it's much easier to know about Buenos Aires than it is to know about upcountry Argentina. And you can multiply that by maybe 150 countries in the world that we know very, very little about.
Very little. It's true. Yeah.
So I think that's one of the next challenges for academics.
So you were one of the pioneers who started to work in European international management, and you have a lot of publications on this, right? And comparing, I would say, Anglo-Saxon, American, traditional international HRM and non-American, right? Is any country that come to your mind that is have a particular distinctiveness?
Oh, no, I think in a way every country is distinctive. I mean, that's the interesting thing. But you're quite right. Your analysis is absolutely accurate. I mean, the first people looking at comparative human resource management, their main focus was on why it's different from the United States. So it was always, not always, but in many cases, it was just a two-way focus. It's us in the United States, or us and the textbooks and the gurus and the experts that we know about, who are all from the United States. So a lot of the work in the UK, but also in places like France and Italy and Germany, of course, was saying we don't do things that way. We do it differently, and maybe that's not because we're backward. Maybe we just have a different, or even maybe a better way of doing it. And I think increasingly there's more theory coming into this area from things like international business. So people are looking at the comparative capitalism's literature and saying, what is important is how the systems hang together, and you can't really understand the way people are managed until you know how businesses relate to each other, how businesses relate to government, how government relates to the control of the way people are employed, and all of these things. And you have to really understand that before you can start understanding the differences in the way people are managed. And then, we see that once you start looking at that, you see two things. One is that actually the United States is, of course, a very successful country, but it has a lot of problems as well. And there are other countries, I mean, you asked about very distinctive countries, and perhaps turning it slightly and saying very coherent countries. You can look at areas like the Nordic countries or like Japan. These are places that are immensely rich. They're on some measures richer than the United States of America. They do much better on the happiness index and the health index and all sorts of other things than the United States of America. And they manage people in a completely different way, much more integrated, people much closer to their managements. Management's taking much more responsibility for their people, much more communication. The American hire and fire thing seems to them to be crass and stupid, and yet they're being successful. So it's a bit of a challenge for the IMF, of course,
Yeah,
because they
yeah.
also try to impose on places like Italy and Greece and Spain this kind of American model, and yet we've got these other models that are also very successful.
Very successful,
So,
yeah.
I think we need to start looking at that.
Fantastic. So just maybe to finish, are you suggesting that the traditional American, or not Anglo-Saxon, but particularly American way of practicing expatriation is changing forever because of the new dynamic of the capitalism, or is
Well, I think,
or because
I think-
multiplicity of
Yeah,
understanding?
I think that's a really interesting question. I think what's happening in expatriation, again, is a distinction between what goes on in businesses and what goes on in the academic discourse. Because for businesses, it's very straightforward. They have a category of people, and they call them expatriates, and you're either assigned to that, and then you get benefits, and bonuses, and big pay, and all sorts of other advantages, or you're not in that category. I think we're increasingly seeing from the academic side that actually that's really underestimating the international human resources that organisations use. So we, as you know, have been looking at things like self-initiated expatriates, people who, academics for example, who
like
go
me.
to another country and get a job when they get there,
Yeah.
or apply for a job in another country. People who work in the United Nations have to apply from 200 countries around the world to go and work in Geneva or New York. So they're self-initiated expatriates. And then, of course, there is a fairly blurry line between migrants and expatriates. Some people migrate to another country and go home within a year. Other people go as an expatriate to a country and stay there for the rest of their lives. So, we can't draw the hard and fast lines. And interestingly, these different streams of academic research have gone on parallel, so that they're going in the same direction, but they're not referring or touching each other at all. And I think what we've been trying to do in some of the research we've been doing recently is to try and bring some of the messages from the migration area into the expatriation area. I've been looking, I've always had an interest since I started working with the United Nations in multicultural people, people who, if I say to you, where are you from? You say Italy. If you say to me, where are you from? I say London. But some people, if you say, where are you from? They say, well, my mother is from Argentina, my father is a Moroccan, I was born in France and I grew up in Geneva and now I work in New York. And where are you from? Doesn't make an awful lot of sense.
It's true,
and there are more and more of those people around the world because travel is easier and people get to know each other in different countries and so on. So that kind of overlap of the expatriation area is one that I've been looking at particularly. And the other area that we've been looking at in expatriation is what happens to expatriates. We know that it's difficult to return home sometimes, but what does that mean 10 years later? Does it mean the end of their career, or do they actually go on to somewhere much better? And the research data we've got, which comes from Finland, seems to show that expatriation is almost always seen as a really positive thing for people's careers. And both on objective and subjective criteria seems to be associated with success in your career. So I think that's an interesting counterbalance to a lot of the literature saying that expatriation is a problem. You really shouldn't be out of the boss's sight because your career and so on. Being repatriated is always difficult. Maybe, but long term it seems to be really good for your career. So I think there's lots and lots of areas to start to be looking at and to be working in, and it's a good time to be doing it.
Really good. Excellent, Chris. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
pleasure.
Thank you for coming.
My pleasure.